The automotive industry is set for a revolution that will disrupt and reshape global business, threatening the survival of every organization. To make sure you survive and win in the new automotive game, automotive growth expert Roberto Dal Corso has interviewed global experts from the automotive industry to identify the changes and the impacts that are coming to keep you ahead of the curve.
Hi and welcome to the leading disruptive automotive trends from around the globe. And today we have a very special guest all the way from Denmark. We have Christoffer Husted Rasmussen. Christoffer, welcome and thank you for taking the time out today to be with us.
Thank you, Roberto. Nice to be here.
No, it's great to have you. And Christoffer, just a quick question. What's the weather like in Denmark? Because it's starting to be spring here in Zurich.
Yesterday it was kind of springy. Today it's snowing, so I don't know what to make out of it. Calendar says April, weather says December. I don't know what to make of it.
Well, please keep the snow. Christoffer, just jumping straight into it. I mean, you've got a non-traditional, if I can call it that, background into the automotive industry. So give us a little background, where you come from and how you got involved in the automotive industry and, what gets you excited about it?
I've been hugely passionate about cars for my whole life. I think the first pictures of me as a 2-year-old kid, I always had a little toy car in my hand. So cars have been an integrated part of my life always. And I guess you couldn't grow up in a worse country than Denmark when you love cars. We have 150% tax on cars. We have no automotive producers, but we actually have a good supplier industry supplying for example, the aftermarket. And I've had various encounters with the industry. I've been a consultant for more than 10 years in various firms. Today I have my own consulting company, and I've served major OEMs on strategy and commercial topics in faraway places from Denmark like Japan and the Middle East. I've supported my private equity clients on various acquisitions in the automotive space, predominantly on the supplier side. So I know the industry from various angles, and I've had the opportunity to look into some of the trends shaping the industry and especially the aftermarket in recent times. Okay.
Before we jump into the trends, how many cars and what cars do you have then?
I have 3 cars, and I experiment with various ownership models. So I have an Alfa Romeo Spider that I own, and that is not yet suitable for the weather outside, so that'll be out in about 3 weeks' time. Then a small Audi Q2 and a BMW 550 for the long haul.
That's for the family vehicle, I assume, eh?
That's the family vehicle.
No, then you truly are passionate. 3 cars in Denmark with your tax rate, I'm with you and I feel you. I feel you. But jumping into the trends, I mean, you've coming from a consultancy background, you've done equity, you've done the acquisition side, you've done strategy development. So you bring a very unique perspective, if I can call it that way, because it's not the traditional one from someone from living inside there going, these are the issues we have. I mean, this is someone that sat from the outside, looked inside and gone, I see what's happening in the marketplace, I see how it's changing, and I see the issues you have. I mean, what would some of your bigger trends or bigger concepts be that you've seen as changes in the industry?
So given that, so my vantage point here is aftermarket and probably let's call it a 5 to 10 year horizon.
Yes.
So electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles, I'm not going to talk a whole lot about that because obviously those are mega trends. Those are trends shaping the industry. But I think thinking about how the car park is going to develop and still the very small rates of new cars being sold that are actually purely electric and that are autonomously driven, and looking at the projections ahead, I think we are looking at, on a 5-10 year horizon, at a quite diverse car park that's predominantly still going to be predominantly being a internal combustion engine car park. So it's other trends that I'm actually going to mention now, and I have a couple that I think we should talk about.
Yeah, please.
The first one is that I actually think that we're seeing a bigger shift from personal to collective car ownership, and that takes various forms. Car sharing, and I would say Denmark is kind of a front runner in that perspective, that you can lend your own personal vehicle to others when it's not in use.
Okay.
So I think that's a mega trend in society, that you make better use of assets by sharing, and I think that certainly goes for cars as well.
Yeah.
But it's not only these car sharing agreements where my own personal car can make that available for others. It's also the fact that we are seeing more fleet ownership and less personal ownership. So I think the bigger implication is that the customers is more and more going to be fleet owners, fleet operators, rather than personal, than the individual person, which has implication, of course, for where you're going to have your car repaired and who's making the decisions and so on. So the first trend I want to highlight is this shift from personal to collective or to fleet ownership.
Yeah. And I mean, that one, when you look at it, I mean, I know that Uber is making a very big jump into that one with the car sharing scheme. And I mean, I think statistically, and I don't know the exact number, but anything over 90% of the times your private car is sitting around doing nothing, underutilized. So absolutely, I can understand why this is catching on. But I certainly want to speak to you more about the implications that it will have for, the servicing and the parts side of it down the road. What other trends did you have in mind that you see changing the shape of the world we live in?
Yes. So the next one I want to mention is I think the OEMs, they are expanding their aftermarket activities, and I think we're seeing various forms here, but we're seeing probably the most extreme being the PSA Group actively acquiring players down the value chain. But I think in various forms, OEMs are certainly taking a larger position and trying to take a position in the aftermarket and attempting to control a larger share of the life cycle of the car. Because ultimately that's where you can still generate a lot of money. So I think we will see OEMs expanding their aftermarket activities.
True. And I mean, what you've just mentioned is not just on the passenger car side, because we see the exact same examples happening on the commercial vehicle on the truck side.
Yes, indeed. The next thing I want to mention, and I think this is probably a pretty obvious one, but consolidation is happening, and we've seen some major examples very recently in Northern Europe on the trade side. But I think on both the supplier side and on the trade side, consolidation is ongoing, and we are moving from a structure of very nationally dominated trade to more cross-country and more pan-European, if you will, trade. And I think that consolidation wave is not yet over. So both on the supply and on the trade side, consolidation is happening.
Yeah. No, I mean, and yes, absolutely. When you look at the changes that have gone on, whether it's from Peters or from various of the other members buying in, and the consolidation is going, and it's absolutely incredible. I was talking to someone earlier in Brazil, and he's explaining how some of the same consolidation is taking place down in Brazil, and it's a global phenomenon. It is happening. It's very real.
Indeed.
So where would you like to start? Because I know you've also got a very unique take on some of these things, or a unique angle to look at things.
I think a couple of more trends that I just quickly want to mention, and then we can probably talk about the implications along the value chain. I think the next one I want to mention is the availability of car-generated data, and the lack of clear strategies how to use it is one trend that I see when I speak to importers and to OEMs. It's very clear that, it's very obvious that a lot more data is being generated, and you can do a lot more on the diagnostic side with car-generated data. But it's also pretty unclear how OEMs are going to monetize that and actually going to make use of it. Mm-hmm. So I think that's going to be one trend shaping the aftermarket going forward as well.
Yeah.
The last key trend shaping the aftermarket that I want to mention is that's back to the value chain. Is we also see sort of new intermediaries and new players along the value chain playing a role, and insurers is an obvious one to mention. But the fact that insurers, and you can even find it written in insurance policies in some markets stipulating where you take your car for a repair, obviously steering the car to a cheaper repair using cheaper parts in some instances. So I think we're going to see new decision makers, new intermediaries playing a role along the value chain.
Yeah, I mean that's interesting that you mentioned the insurance companies, because yes, I mean, they are at this moment in time standing to potentially lose a lot. So they're looking for new models in terms of generating revenue going forward.
And I think we are, there's a big difference here, but I think we are seeing some insurers being, you can say, being more proactive and being more innovative, such as, licensing multiple repair shops so that you can steer not only crash volumes but also other types of repairs, and as you say, look for new revenue streams.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of weeks ago I was talking to one of the insurance companies based in Switzerland, and they were explaining to me the exact same thing, and in fact they are now setting up a division that was going to specifically focus and strategically focus on these new revenue streams and models. So it's a big thing. It's a big thing. So yeah, that's very interesting that you mentioned that, and I'm glad you did.
So maybe where we could go next is then talk a bit about, so when we take these trends, and obviously there's more, these were just sort of the ones most top of mind, but what's sort of going to happen along the value chain, and maybe starting towards the end customer, and see how are these trends basically going to play out. And I think if we think about the fact that ownership moving from the individual to more fleet ownership, and thereby more professional buyers, and the increasing complexity of cars with more software and more diagnostic, I think the times of the mom and pop repair shop in Europe, I think, is probably on the decline. So I think we are going to see more larger professional repair chains taking share of the market. But I think we're also potentially seeing sort of a convergence between the authorized and the independent shops, because being an OEM and wanting to control a larger part of the value chain on the one hand, and knowing the complexity of being a repair shop and the certifications and the training that's required, I think we are going to see more of the independent repair shop with a brand authorized BMW, authorized VW or whatever on the front. So I think on the one hand side it's going to be larger chains, more professional, but also potentially a convergence between the traditional OEM authorized repair shop and the independent ones, so that you as an OEM still can have a say in the parts being used and the data that's being leveraged in the cars and so on. So I think that's one way that you will see the sort of the repair side potentially changing.
I can imagine, and alongside of that, you've also got the two driving factors of digitalization, of forcing that sort of divergence in terms of new information, faster information, and as you rightfully mentioned, away from the the smaller mom and pop shops to professional service providers now. And then I think at the same time you've also got the workforce and the customer base changing, and they are now far more digitalized or IT savvy than, let's call it, myself and the older generation.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And back to sort of the changing ownership models, I think we're going to see OEMs, importers, etc., offering these mobility solutions. So I mentioned one of the cars I have is kind of a subscription-based model that's run by the national importer. So you can exchange the car for whatever need you have. But it means that I will always take that car to an Audi repair shop, because the car will tell me when it needs to go to repair, and I would never, for this car, I would never make the decision of taking it to an independent repair shop. The same being the case if this was a Mercedes or a BMW or Toyota offered a mobility service. And I think importers, OEMs and the likes, they are going to expand their subscription-based models. The times of selling and even leasing cars are probably on the decline, and offering mobility as a service, which means that it will be very obvious where the car will go for repair, and I as an individual will no longer make that decision, and that will reinforce the potential sort of industry structure that I talked about.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, in this case, because of the subscription, you are now limited, or they take the decision-making process out of where you want to go and get the car serviced.
Yes.
I would potentially...
And I couldn't care, because I pay a fixed fee.
Yeah,
I pay basically per kilometer a fixed fee that I drive, so I don't care.
Yeah.
If it was my own car, with my Alpha, I have an opinion where the car will be taken for service, because it's my own car.
Yeah, it's true. And I can imagine some of the impacts for some of the, let's call it, non-branded distributors out there, or service networks, that's got to be a concern.
Yes, and their game will be to secure larger contracts with fleet providers to stay in business.
How prepared are you to navigate the disruptive trends that are set to hit your business? Will you survive and win in the coming years? To understand your level of risk exposure and to help you avoid becoming a statistic of failure, take the free risk assessment here, www.dalcorsogroup.com, which will identify the gaps and how to navigate the risks. By taking the risk assessment, you get a chance to win a free 30-minute strategy session with automotive growth expert Roberto Dal Corso. Roberto can help you identify an amount equivalent to 7% of your total annual sales that you are leaving on the table each year. To survive and win, take action now and visit www.dalcorsogroup.com.
If we move up the chain, I think and talk a bit about the trade side. I actually think and there are probably various opinions about this, but I actually think the wholesale model is going to prevail. And at the same time, I think this is a hugely inefficient chain with so many warehouses and so many places where you find stocks on the way from the part manufacturer and all the way to the repair shop, that there's bound to be some kind of rationalization along the value chain. So just moving stocks is maybe going to be a tricky business. But I actually think the wholesale business is going to prevail, but we're probably going to see sort of, as they grow bigger, as their ability to provide training and other kinds of value-added services to the repair shops, that's probably going to be the value proposition of the large wholesalers.
Of the wholesalers.
And if you're merely somebody handling inventory and ensuring speedy supply, you might be up for some competition by Amazon in the future.
I can imagine, coming out of the industry, availability is critical. All of a sudden, if the wholesaler is only selling it based on the availability and not being able to add any additional value to the repairer, then all of a sudden, Amazon suddenly comes in there and can be incredibly disruptive, with some of the models that we see and hear about. And I mean, it's amazing that, and I'm just jumping up a second, because a lot of these major mega trends are driven by non-traditional automotive people, whether it's, whether it's Amazon, whether it's Uber, whether it's Google. These are the guys changing a lot of the landscape for us.
Yes, absolutely. And then I wonder, and I have no good answer for this, but if I think about the fact that theoretically you should be increasingly able to plan your repair, because the availability of diagnostic data and the car telling the repair shop before it comes to the repair shop what's wrong and what needs to be fixed, and the repair shop's getting more professional, you should be able to plan also your required supplies of parts that are in advance. So maybe the sort of you can say spoiled, the spoiled reality where you have the parts within 6 hours or 8 hours or at the latest the next day. Maybe that's no longer as critical a value proposition, and some of what's driving the sort of the proximity of stocks. Because again, in theory, you should be able to plan your repairs better in the future. But I don't know. But that's really an ingrained characteristic of the chain and the relationship between the repair shop and the wholesaler.
Yeah. No, that is interesting. And I mean, then again, you look at some of the models that, I've seen here in Zurich where Mercedes were testing out pretty much delivering spare parts by drone. So it's going to be very interesting. And I think that's what makes the automotive industry so exciting at the moment, is there's so many possibilities, but we are not quite sure where it's going to go and how it's going to pan out. We have a good idea, but we are not certain.
Not at all. Moving up the chain and thinking about sort of the supplier part. I think when I speak to the independent aftermarket focused players, they are pretty bullish about the future and say the OE suppliers, they don't understand the independent aftermarket, and their whole value chain is set up to deliver to OEMs. And for them, the aftermarket is merely going to be an afterthought. I don't quite believe that. I actually think the OEs, they have a claim on the independent aftermarket, and for sure they know the size and the potential growth rates. And there are various ways to go. I think we may gonna see sort of more fighter brands as a way to compete for an OE supplier. So cheaper brands probably supplied by the aftermarket focused players. But the positioning is difficult, and Valeo Classic being one example that was basically closed down. So the positioning is difficult, but I think we are going to see a battle for the aftermarket, for the independent aftermarket among the OE players and their relationships to the OEMs, and thereby potentially to the repair chains, as we discussed previously, will definitely be an enabler for them.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you said there, because I envisage the same thing happening where the OEMs will become stronger. They have a right to play in the market. They own a lot of the value chain and can take a lot of the costs out, let's say, unfortunately, which again, puts a lot of the independents at potentially a disadvantage where they might see, the market share shrinking for them.
Yes, and you have an inherent advantage in being part of the design of the car and being in close relationship with the OEM. So if we believe the OEM and their sort of levers to control a larger part of the life cycle, I think as an OE you also have a role to play for sure. So if you're an aftermarket focused player, I think we are going to see some with a strong and unique value proposition, like if you master remanufacturing as a capability and thereby supplying the independent aftermarket as well as being a sub-supplier to potentially the OEs for their aftermarket activities, in particular in certain categories like brakes or things like that. But pure repackers that are aftermarket focused players may be going to be a tricky value proposition in the future. So I think that there you will also see some consolidation and some players basically disappearing over this time horizon.
Yeah. No, it's true, and it's so interesting. You mentioned, that as an OE you have an advantage because you can help, design a product. But not only can you design the product for first fit, you can almost design it pre-thinking ahead of, well, how are we going to sell this in the aftermarket? And by changing certain features or making it difficult for other people to repair or remanufacture your product, you can certainly try and slow down the rate that competitors enter the marketplace.
Yes, exactly.
And that is true.
So we touched a bit about on the OEMs initially, but basically rounding that off. I mean, I guess some of the key levers for OEMs to maintain relevance in the aftermarket and control a larger part of the life cycle is the access and the control of the diagnostic data and potentially their offering of new mobility services going forward. And again, I think via own workshops and contracts with independent changes how they're physically going to steer the volume, and then by control and limiting access and basically increasing complexity to access this diagnostics, I actually think OEMs have a pretty good chance of controlling a bigger part of the aftermarket going forward.
Yeah, no. I mean, I remember coming out of the aftermarket. I mean, one of the biggest challenges we used to have years ago was, OEs could supersede part numbers for any reason that they could think of, which made it very difficult to track down the line. Now, I know through digitalization, a lot of that goes away, but you can change different aspects of a part and not just the part number to make it further, increase the difficulties and complexities for independents. So there's a lot.
Absolutely.
There's a lot that they've got in their favor.
Yes, absolutely. So those were sort of my top level thoughts on how's the value chain going to potentially look a bit different when we look on a 5-10 year time horizon.
Yeah.
And the last thing I've thought about is basically if you are a supplier, what are some of the questions that you ought to be asking yourself when preparing for this future? I think the first one to talk about is there a way for me to basically supplement my, let's call it hardware-based solution with software digital-based services like upgrades? Because I think as we see a larger share of the car and of the parts is going to be software, and that provides you whole new potential revenue streams for offering upgrades. Navigation system is a good example. It's probably not a very good example because the time for charging for that, in my view, is over because Google Maps can do that a whole lot better. But seeing the way that Tesla is offering more horsepower as an upgrade, and I think given the level of softwareization, there are going to be more and more opportunities for offering those kind of upgrades that are not necessarily hardware based, and that's new revenue streams that you ought to be thinking about.
Yeah. Very good question, that one.
The next one I would ask is, and this is for the you can say the OEs. So, am I being cannibalized by aftermarket focused suppliers, and how do I then take some of this volume myself? For example, by offering fighter brands. So, is there a way for me to offer a B brand, sourcing in the products, offering it as a remanufacturing solution, but basically cannibalizing myself instead of being cannibalized by others when I think about the potential shift in volume from the authorized to the independent channel. Is one thing I would definitely consider.
Yeah. No, auto cannibalization. I like the concept behind that one, I must say.
Looking then outside your own four walls, I think it's also interesting to consider what are new partnership models for me to engage in. Is there a way for me to engage with some of the new intermediaries that we talked about, like insurers? Because if we believe that there are actually new intermediaries controlling part of the volumes and are steering repairs, is there a way for me to collaborate with some of those intermediaries that allow me to ensure that my parts are being used? And I really want to highlight the insurance example as potential collaboration partners for some of the part suppliers.
I like that. I like that. Look for new partnership with the new disruptive trends or the new disruptive forces within the markets, because they're the drivers.
Yes, exactly. And the last one, and now we talked a lot about Europe, but I think when you think about the growth rates and you think about the growth rates in the aftermarket following when new car sales have been picking up, we're going to look at very low growth rates in the aftermarket in Europe and much higher rates and a maturing aftermarket in China, for example. So and I know that many of my clients are rather European focused aftermarket suppliers. So there's an urgent need to look for expanding your footprint beyond Europe, because we are going to see vastly different growth rates, probably towards the 1 to 2% in Europe and the plus 5 to 7% in Asia, including China, in the coming years.
True. I mean, that's just factual, and China is the fastest growing market. Just one question. I mean, when you sum all of those up, and in your experience and, the people that you've spoken to in the market and how you see it working, how many parts suppliers are asking themselves these questions, and how many are actually ready or anticipating these market changes?
I think it's a good question. I think the aftermarket-focused suppliers, they are pretty trapped in the industry structure as we know it, and are optimizing for the world today. And I think for the OEs, I think bulk of the focus is still on their OEM business, and they can do a lot more to focus on their aftermarket business, because that's going to be a critical value generator for them going forward.
Yeah, no, that's, I mean, when you were talking through that, it just brought to mind that last year I saw I think it was actually a McKinsey study, a company which you're well familiar with, where they had gone out and interviewed parts manufacturers in the aftermarket, and I think 80% of the parts manufacturers came back saying that they didn't feel that they were adequately prepared for these changes.
Yes.
So I think it's certainly, again, it goes back to, I think it's in a very exciting time for the automotive industry.
Yes, absolutely. And I think among all of we say, who knows where what the industry and the value chain is going to look like. But I think there are some of the things we talk about that we can take for granted, in particular around the changing ownership, the increased complexity and softwareization, and as a consequence, some of the changes on the repair side. So I think among all of this, of which there are obviously many speculation, there are also some which I think we can take for given when preparing for the future.
And a couple of last questions. I know that we pushed for time, and I do appreciate that you take the time with us. But when you look at the industry as a whole, I mean, parts manufacturers today, what do you think are their biggest daily business issues that they face? Are they related to, the changes we're talking about, or do they have some other major day-to-day issues, if I can put it that way, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, I think the when you are an OE, I think your let me call it your margin struggle in your negotiation with the OEMs and the let me call it the daily negotiations. I think and basically making a healthy business, that's part of the main struggle and the daily business. And I think when you're an aftermarket focused player, it's the negotiations with the trade side and optimizing that part of your business and keeping up with some of the changes that are happening in the trade landscape.
Yeah. No, and one final question. Parts manufacturer, what piece of advice would you give them if they were thinking of coming to Europe, or would you probably tell them, don't even come to Europe, go to China? What would you advise them?
I think there's great opportunities for many part manufacturers in Europe. I think you could say growing on the back of your OEM relationship and leveraging that for your aftermarket business. If you are an OE supplier, and when you are an aftermarket focused player, I would say think about what sort of your key value proposition over and beyond basically supplying box product, being it your remanufacturing capability or whatever it might be, but you need increasingly to offer something more than basically box products going forward.
Yeah, no, very, very wise words there. I like them a lot. And just changing gears away from automotive, I know your passion is cars. What's one of your passions outside of the automotive industry then?
So right now I hope for spring to enjoy two of my other passions, namely tennis and running. And clearly the weather is not for that right now. So that's what I look forward to. And then I'm very passionate about my 1.5-year-old son, and hopefully seeing him becoming a petrol head like his father.
Well, I mean, it'll be interesting to see if, petrol cars will still exist, or, I mean, if you think of some of the people out there like Google trying to push, autonomous driving, will we ever be able to drive a car, when he turns 18 and he's old enough legally?
I think it's very unlikely that he will have a driver's license, unfortunately, but you can still hope.
It would be sad because, I mean, I can think of, I understand that autonomous driving brings great positive benefits, but at the same time, I mean, the sheer pleasure of driving a car, it's the ultimate freedom, and I would hate for people to lose that.
Yes, and I think the good news for people who feel like you and me is that the times until we're all behind the non-existent wheel of an autonomous car is very far into the future. So I think there'll be ample opportunities to drive on the back roads in Zurich or in Denmark or in South Africa for years to come.
I hope so. I mean, to me, one of the benefits of having an autonomous vehicle, when you've got to take your car for a wash or go get the tires changed summer to winter, it'll just take itself. That would be brilliant. I could use that.
Absolutely.
No, but Christoffer, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on. I have learned so much from you. I can only hope that our viewers have enjoyed it just as much and have gotten as much information out as I have. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Roberto.
I hope that you have enjoyed and found value in watching this interview. If you want to learn more about the leading disruptive automotive trends impacting the industry, check out www.dalcorsogroup.com. I encourage you to share it with colleagues that will appreciate great industry insights. Join us tomorrow for more experts from around the world.